Welcome in. We begin with some breaking news in the war with Iran. An American fighter jet has been shot down in Iranian airspace. Two sources now tell CBS News that U.S. forces rescued one of the two crew members in that jet, but search and rescue efforts are ongoing for the second member. And the message from a governor of southwestern Iran province this hour says this: whoever captures or kills the crew of the downed U.S. jet will be specially commended. We've got team coverage on all of this. Standing by for us, CBS News national security analyst Erin MacLean, and we have CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson. But first, let's bring in Erin MacLean. He's a U.S. Marine veteran and a former foreign policy advisor on Capitol Hill. Erin, thanks again for joining us. Can you help us understand the hardware that we're talking about here? What type of fighter jet is this, and just how many pilots would have been flying it?
Right. Well, so this appears to have been an F-15E. This is an American fighter jet that also is a bomber over Iran in recent weeks. We can assume it's being used for so-called air-to-ground missions, so prosecuting targets on the ground. You heard the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, speak in his most recent briefing about how the Air Force and the U.S. military are shifting to so-called dynamic targeting. To put that in layman's terms, what it means is that the aircraft are kind of hanging out in the skies over Iran, waiting for targeting information to come in, and then they go after whatever the target may be, whether that's a missile launcher or what have you. Obviously, the longer you loiter, the longer you stick around, the more missions like this that you run, even if you're in a condition of air superiority, people are going to shoot at you, and eventually something like this could happen.
Yeah. And what do we know about the area where this plane came down?
This is western Iran. This is a mountainous area, sort of a tribal region. It's not all Persian. There are Arab tribes in the area. So it's, we can presume, I think, a pretty complex situation on the ground. Look, assuming that these pilots, or these crew members are both able to get to the ground safely and alive and able to move, their training is to escape and evade. Their job is to stay away from the bad guys long enough that the rescuers can get to them. And the human terrain down there, are you dealing with people who are friendly to the regime, or are you dealing with people hostile to the regime? That's obviously a factor, but kind of hard to know in advance because you don't know exactly who it is you're going to meet down there.
Yeah, that is a good point. And let's stick with that because we're now being told that one crew member has been rescued. So what do you think will go into the rescue mission for this other crew member?
Right. Well, it's obviously wonderful news if we have one rescued. Something to think about, even though you're sort of ejecting at more or less the same point in space and time from this aircraft. This aircraft, it's a jet, right? It's going pretty fast. So these two people can come down on the, I'm going to assume here, I want to assume that the second crew member is also alive and got out of the aircraft alive. They might actually be pretty far apart on the ground when they land. They might be in different circumstances. I mean, a few hundred meters even on the ground is a pretty big difference in tactical terms. So it's not totally surprising to hear that we have one and are still waiting for news on the second one. These special operations forces that are doing this rescue are going to keep pushing until they figure out exactly what happened with the second one.
Yeah, and as you're talking, we're looking at video there earlier. It looks like that is of the fighter jet that came down. I want to ask you about the Iranian regime itself. Do you think this is sort of a victory for them?
Well, we've been talking about how we have air superiority over Iran. Having air superiority does not mean that you are invulnerable. This kind of thing can happen. There can be a lucky shot. We could have missed an air defense system. They might have held an air defense system in reserve to use later in the campaign. So in purely military terms, frankly, you would anticipate something like this happening eventually. That's why, obviously, with the special operations forces you see doing the rescue, we were staged and prepared for it to happen. The impact is really political. Is the other crew member who we don't have accounted for yet, are they alive and captured by the Iranians? That's going to have an enormous impact for them. That's going to be a source of leverage for them in negotiations. Obviously a propaganda victory. We'll just have to see what happens there.
Yeah. Erin MacLean, appreciate your insight today. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Now let's go live to Washington and CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson. Eleanor, let's stick with what we were talking about earlier. I asked Erin if this was somehow a propaganda victory for the Iranian regime, but I want to ask you just how significant all of this is.
Well, this is significant, Mugo, because it would be the first fighter jet down over Iran since the conflict began. Iran has been shooting at fighter jets since the beginning. Last week, I believe it was last week, we reported on an F-35 that was hit by Iran, but then safely landed. The U.S. has lost other F-15s, but those were in friendly fire incidents in Kuwait, and all of the crew members safely ejected. This is the first fighter jet downed over Iran. I want to kind of go over how this has played out this morning, because initially Iran state media claimed to have downed a jet, and then we started seeing images appear of helicopters and a refueling plane flying low to the ground in daylight, appearing to show a search and rescue effort underway. The U.S. officials confirmed to CBS there is a search and rescue. Now, one member of the crew of the F-15 has been rescued by U.S. forces, we're told, while search and rescue is ongoing for the second member. An F-15E holds two crew members, which is important as this search and rescue goes on. So far, we haven't heard from the Pentagon or the White House about this jet.
Yeah, and I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, because we have more questions, I guess, about the search and rescue operation that's happening right now. One person, right, one of those crew members has been found, and right now they're still looking for another one?
That's what we believe, because an F-15E carries two crew members.
Yeah.
We're told by U.S. officials that one member has been rescued by U.S. forces, but that hasn't ended the search and rescue, meaning there is still one underway for potentially a second crew member.
And when this first happened, I guess earlier today, this morning, there were questions as to whether or not this was an F-35 or an F-15, and now you're saying it's an F-15E. How did that confirmation come about?
That was kind of confirmed by open source images online. The Iranians initially claimed an F-35, but there are very smart people online who confirmed from the tail images that Iranian state media have posted that it's more likely an F-15. I will note Iran has claimed in the past, made several claims about shooting down American fighter jets, because as you were talking about with Aaron, it could be considered a propaganda win, showing that although the Pentagon and the White House talk about air superiority, they're still able to get these dangerous shots off. In the past, those claims have been unverified, have been fact-checked by U.S. Central Command, by the command of U.S. forces in the Middle East, but this time so far we're not hearing refutes of the reporting from the Pentagon or the White House, and the White House actually confirmed to our reporters there that the president has been briefed on the incident.
Okay, Eleanor Watson, thank you so much for your reporting.